Yeah, I understand that the sort of theme of the moment is spiritual death, one of the great stages of the spiritual path in the Triratna system of practice. Um, and the particular thing that I'm going to talk about is the this week and next week is the five skandhas, the teaching of the five skandhas. So this is one of the, in a way, it's one of the methods of one of the practices associated with spiritual death. So first of all, one of the sort of perspectives, one of the teachings, one of the ways of sort of thinking about our experience. First of all, I wonder if I could just ask, I know you will have come across it, Aryapala, but Rob and Sagar, have you come across these teachings before, or are you familiar with them?
Yeah.
You are, Rob,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't quite, a little bar's come up, so I can't quite see you at the moment. So I couldn't see who was speaking. So was that you? What was that you, Rob, saying that you are
Yeah,
familiar?
that was me, Rob. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm
Okay.
familiar with them. Yeah.
And Sagar, have you come across the five skandhas before?
Actually, I don't remember the what we call it in English, but I might have come across in my native language, that is Marathi or Hindi.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. So
yeah,
well, skandhas is the Sanskrit word or Pali? Not
Pali.
quite sure. Pali word skandhas, yeah, or khandas, I think they're sometimes called. So I'll say a little bit about them. I'll introduce them. My plan was basically to sort of introduce them this week and then next week talk about how you might apply them, how you might actually use them. But I'll stay flexible to that. We'll see how we go on. First of all, I think I'll just share. Oh, can I share a screen? I need to be a co-host, I think, to share a screen, don't I? I don't know if it's possible to. Is it possible to allow me to? Great. Oh gosh, it's asking me to go into screen. I'm afraid I'm going to have to abandon that attempt. So I'll just say verbally what they are. So a skanda, often it's translated as heap, like a pile of something. But I understand that actually it also means something like branch, like the branch of a tree. And actually, I find that a much more helpful translation of the term, because you get the sense with, that a branch of the tree is still very much, a tree with five branches. It's very much one thing, but nevertheless, you can sort of talk about these sort of different aspects. They sort of root into the same thing. And the five branches, what they're talking about is the five branches of our experience as embodied beings, embodied human beings. And traditionally, these five aspects of our experience, they sort of account for the totality of being an embodied human being. Okay. So the five skandhas are, first of all, rupa, and rupa, as you may well know, means form. So rupa can mean like our body. Okay. Sometimes people think that rupa means sort of matter or something like that. It's not. It's form. So actually, form can include things like light, sound, and so on. Rupa is a sort of pattern. Shape, color, but not only in the visual sense, in all of the senses, the sort of content of the senses, if you like. Vedana is the next one, vedana, which means feeling. So that's feeling tone. And that's what we experience on the sort of continuum between pleasure and pain and neutral in between. Okay, so as human beings, we experience form, but we also experience things as some things as painful, some things as pleasurable, some things somewhere in between. Okay, that's vedana. So not only do we experience form and feeling, but we've got a whole kind of apparatus of perception, so that our experience isn't just a sort of jumble of form and feeling. We've got a sense of sort of understanding, of perceiving objects. So, I can look around this room. There's some flowers. There's a lamp, plant, picture. Yoshi's now come into the room and he's sitting over there. So I've perceived all of these things. And there's particular senses have come into my mind. And I've sort of sorted them with my previous experience, and I've been able to label them as, flower, Yoshi, plant, and so on. Okay. So that's on a very ordinary level in a way. We perceive objects as objects, even as I look at sort of color. I can see that this is pink. So I've got a whole sort of system of sort of recognition and perception going on. And that's part of my experience as well. It's not just a sort of jumble. It's how I make sense of the world. So rupa, vedana, samjna. But there's also something going on in my experience where I'm making choices. Everything that I do now, the words I'm speaking now, there is a sort of volition going on, and this is samskara. Okay, these are the choices that I'm making, and in particular, I'm making sort of ethical choices. Hopefully at this moment, positive ones. But there's a sort of constant flow of me sort of doing something. Okay, at least that's how I experience it. And that's habits. Yeah. So a lot of those are sort of enshrined as sort of habitual behavior, or my, our actions, if repeated, become habits. Our habits, if repeated, sort of become personality. And this is the whole sort of area of samskara. Yeah. So far we've built up. My experience consists of the experience of form, which I apprehend through the senses, on the basis of that, I experience degrees of feeling. And on the basis of that, I sort of build up a perception of reality. And at the same time, I'm choosing my actions of mind, actions of voice, actions of body. Okay, that's all going on. And then the fifth one, perhaps a bit more difficult to get a hold of. The fifth one is vijnana, often just translated as consciousness. Although that word is sort of made of two parts, it's vi and jnana. So jnana is something like knowing, and vi, it's a bit like the vi in division. So it's like divided consciousness, or you could say dualistic consciousness. So on the basis of all that's gone before, I sort of build up this sort of sense of me. There's a me who is doing all of this perceiving, a me who's experiencing form, a me who's making choices, choosing to do things, and so on. And this is also sort of part of my experience. Is the sort of the world is made of two poles, the sort of here and there. So that's divided, dualistic consciousness. So that according to the Buddha, this is quite a good way of understanding what's going on and sort of working with what's going on in our experience. It's quite interesting when he gave this teaching at, I think it was at Savatthi, according to the sutta. We don't get a story in the sutta about what particularly prompted the Buddha to talk about this. Sometimes you do, and it's quite interesting to know the backstory. But one thing that the Buddha did say at the beginning of this teaching was pay good attention. He said, listen and heed well. And he didn't always say that with every teaching that he gave, but with this one, he seemed perhaps to want to emphasize like this is important, or this is really useful. This is, he really wanted them to sort of take on this teaching. So the point of it all, and this is where the sort of spiritual death comes in. So in spiritual death, we're sort of letting go of these sort of fixed constructs of the self. Okay, that's basically what spiritual death is. It's a sort of letting go of the idea of oneself as being a sort of fixed, separate part of existence, part of the universe. Not in order to enter some sort of completely empty, black kind of void, but actually in order to experience a kind of bigger sense of connectedness, one that is sort of just less tight. Less sort of, we're not sort of grasping onto something so much. So there's just a sort of sense that we're, with spiritual death, we're just sort of opening out, letting go of this sort of tight little self and opening out. So the Skandhas is a sort of way into this. It's a way into doing that. So, a kind of classic way, I can sort of, there's a few different ways of doing it, but there's the sort of classic way is just sort of taking each of these skandhas in turn and just contemplating that each of them are well, they're not sort of fixed. They're sort of part of a flow, as it were. There isn't really a sort of, I can't hold on to any of these and say, this is me, and this is permanent and fixed and separate. So, you know, going through them, we've got rupa. So, you know, well, rupa is sort of all my experience all the time. It's not just my body, but the world around me, the chair I'm sitting in, and the light coming in, and so on. But nevertheless, the bit that I hold on to and identify myself as myself is the body. And of course, well, the body, this particular aspect of form, changes. You know, it came into being many years ago. It grew. You know, it started as an embryo. Grew into a baby. The baby grew up, and so on. And now, you know, I'm starting to getting a bit older, and so on. My body's changing in that sort of sense. And of course, I think they say, don't they, that your body actually, every cell in your body changes over a 7-year period or something like that. So this is a completely different body, except maybe 1 or 2 stem cells or something like that. It's an almost completely different body to how it was as recently as 2016 or 17 or something like that. The me that moved into this house 7 years ago has completely sort of changed physically in that time. There's an input of food, nutrient, water coming in and going out. Okay. So actually, how can I fix onto this as a sort of fixed thing? I mean, ultimately, one day it'll stop being a living body. So there's this body is just part of the flow of the universe. Yeah, it's not separate and fixed. Vedana, feelings, well, these arise all the time. You know, these are constantly. The Buddha compared these to like a bubble. You know, a bubble on the surface of the Ganges when a heavy drop of water flows. It just goes, and then feelings are just like that. You know, something. Our experience is just sort of changing all the time. So in a way, to base the sense of the self on say me having pleasure, we pleasure rather than pain. Well, we're not in control of that. That flows constantly in and out of our experience. Samjna, perceptions, completely sort of conditioned. You know, I sort of see the world because I've sort of through a lens in a way that, you know, I've got through the particular language that I've learned. It sort of alters the, you know, I call things different names. The particular understanding that I've got of the world, of the way things sort of work in the world. That's I haven't, in a way, that's come through my family background, through my culture, through my education, my, you know, the particular perspective that I've got on the world, and so on. In a way, it's not mine. You know, the fact I'm a Buddhist, in a way, I haven't made Buddhism up. I've just completely inherited it from 2,500 years of tradition. So even that is, it's just like that's, I'm part of a flow of something. It's not me. I can't sort of fix on that and say that's me. You know, Akuppa, the Buddhist in Newcastle, I can't claim that as a sort of identity. Samskara, volitions, will they change over time? Uh, in a sense, well, where do those habits come from? Again, they're sort of conditioned. The choices I make are completely or very much sort of conditioned by again, the people I'm with, the understanding that I've got, the upbringing I've had, and so on. And they change over time, hopefully for the better. But they're not fixed. It's open. Our volitions are open. We're not bound by them. So there's no sort of me there either. And really, once you've sort of unpacked all of that, then vijnana itself, the whole experience of, well, who is the me at the middle experiencing all of this? That begins to, well, if there isn't a fixed me of body or a feeling of perceptions of volition, then even the idea of there being a sort of fixed locus of experience, well, that's also a part of a flow. That doesn't have sort of fixed edges, as it were. So that's broadly what the Skandhas are. I actually was doing that practice for quite a few years. That the sort of classic practice that we're given for this on ordination is the 6-element practice. But for some reason, until a few years ago, I couldn't quite get my head around the 6-element practice. So I was doing this practice. I was doing the Skandhas practice for quite a number of years, and on perhaps not far from daily sort of basis. It was part of my practice, and it does. I think just sort of allowing it to become part of the way that you relate to your experience. It does allow things just to sort of unfold a bit, to sort of take yourself a bit less seriously on one level, to be a bit more sort of open to change and flow, and so on. I'll stop there. I'll come back next week and talk a bit more about that. But that's the sort of basis of what the Skandhas practice is, according to my understanding so far.